Captain Jake Morrison stood at the front window of his ship, watching the strange vessels approach Earth. The alien ships were huge, bigger than anything humans had ever built. They moved in perfect lines across the dark space, like metal sharks, swimming through an ocean of stars. 3 days ago, these aliens had arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system. They called themselves the Zephyrian Collective. Their message was simple and direct. Submit to our rule, or we will destroy your planet. They gave humanity 1 week to decide. Jake had been a ship captain for 15 years. He had fought pirates, smugglers, and rebels, but he had never faced anything like this. The aliens had technology that made human weapons look like toys. Their ships could destroy entire cities with a single shot. Admiral Lisa Carter's voice came through the radio from the moon base. Jake, they just sent another message. We have 6 hours left to surrender. They say we are a primitive species that needs their guidance. Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. Primitive. That's what they think of us. The Zephyrians had done this before. They had conquered 847 different planets across the galaxy. Each time the process was the same. They would arrive, demonstrate their power, and wait for surrender. Every species they had encountered made the same choice. They looked at the odds, calculated their chances, and chose to live under alien rule rather than die fighting. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Brooks looked up from his control panel. Sir, their biggest ship is charging its weapons. Looks like they want to show us what they can do. They're aiming at Station Alpha. Station Alpha was humanity's largest space station. 20,000 people lived and worked there. It was also where Earth kept most of its defensive weapons. The aliens wanted to destroy it to prove they were serious. Jake walked over to the communications panel. Signal all human ships in the area. Tell them to get ready. Sir, what are your orders? Ryan asked. Jake smiled. It was not a nice smile. Tell them we're about to give these aliens their first lesson about humans. The Zephyrians expected humans to react like every other species they had conquered. They expected fear, negotiation, and eventually surrender. They had studied human broadcasts and decided that humans were emotional but logical creatures who would choose survival over pride. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The lead Zephyrian ship, massive and sleek, began to glow with deadly energy. Its weapons were designed to slice through space stations like a knife through paper. The alien commander, whose name was unpronounceable by human tongues, watched the human reaction with scientific interest. But instead of panic or surrender, something unexpected happened. Every human ship in the area suddenly changed course. They were not running away. They were moving toward the Zephyrian fleet. Jake's ship, the UES Defiance, led the charge. It was an old military vessel built for fighting human enemies, not alien superweapons. Compared to the Zephyrian ships, it looked like a toy. But Jake didn't care about the odds. All ships, this is Morrison, he broadcast on all channels. They want to threaten our home. They want to scare us into giving up. Well, I've got news for them. Humans don't scare easy. The first Zephyrian plasma bolt fired toward Station Alpha. It was a beam of pure energy that could melt through any known material, but it never reached its target. 3 human ships threw themselves into the path of the beam. They were destroyed instantly, vaporized by the alien weapon. But they had done their job. Station Alpha was safe, and the aliens had just learned something important about humanity. Humans would die to protect what they loved. The Zephyrian commander felt something he had never experienced before. Confusion. In 847 previous conquests, no species had ever sacrificed ships to protect a target. It was illogical. Those ships and their crews were gone forever, and Station Alpha would be destroyed anyway by the next shot. But the humans weren't thinking logically. They were thinking emotionally, and that made them unpredictable. Jake's ship fired its missiles at the nearest Zephyrian vessel. The missiles were primitive compared to alien technology, but there were hundreds of them. The Zephyrian shields easily stopped most of them, but a few got through. They did little damage, but they proved a point. Humans could hurt them. More human. Ships arrived from all over the solar system. Cargo vessels, passenger ships, mining platforms, research stations. Anything that could fly and fight was joining the battle. They came from Mars, from the asteroid belt, from the outer planets. None of them were military vessels. Most of them had no real weapons, but they kept coming. The Zephyrians had overwhelming firepower. Their weapons could destroy human ships, with ease. But for every ship they destroyed, two more appeared. The humans fought like they had nothing to lose because in many ways they didn't. Admiral Carter's voice came over the radio again. "Jake, we're getting reports from all over the system. Every human settlement is mobilizing. They're loading up cargo ships with whatever weapons they can find." Jake dodged another plasma bolt and fired back with his remaining weapons. "Good. Let them come. Let's show these aliens what happens when you threaten Earth." The battle was hopeless by any logical standard. The humans were outgunned, outnumbered, and fighting with inferior technology. But they had something the aliens didn't understand. They had the willingness to fight a battle they couldn't win, simply because it was the right thing to do. Dr. Amanda Foster watched the battle from her laboratory on Earth. She was working frantically to understand the alien technology. But she took a moment to smile as she watched the reports coming in. Humans were doing what they always did when faced with impossible odds. They were fighting anyway. "Come on, Jake," she whispered to herself. "Show them what we're made of." The Zephyrian commander made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing the demonstration, he ordered his fleet to engage the human ships directly. He wanted to end this quickly and move on to the occupation phase. It was a mistake. The moment the aliens committed to a real battle, they entered humanity's element. Humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years. They understood war in ways the Zephyrians never could. War wasn't just about having better weapons. It was about having the will to use whatever you had, no matter how desperate things became. Jake's ship was badly damaged, its hull torn open by alien weapons. Half his crew was injured or dead. But he kept fighting. Around him, other human ships were doing the same thing. They rammed alien vessels when they ran out of ammunition. They used their ships as shields to protect others. They fought until their vessels fell apart around them. The Zephyrians had never seen anything like it. In their previous conquests, once a species realized they were outmatched, they surrendered quickly to minimize losses. But humans seemed to get more dangerous the more desperate they became. As the battle raged on, something strange happened. The perfectly coordinated Zephyrian fleet began to show signs of confusion. Their commanders were trying to adapt to human tactics, but human tactics didn't make sense. They were chaotic, emotional, and completely unpredictable. The aliens began to make mistakes. Jake saw his chance. His ship was dying, its engines failing and life support running low. But he had one last trick to play. He set course for the largest Zephyrian ship and pushed his engines to maximum power. "This is for everyone who thinks humans are primitive," he said into his radio. The UES Defiance crashed into the Zephyrian command ship at full speed. The explosion lit up space like a new star. When the light faded, both ships were gone. But the battle wasn't over. More human ships kept coming. And now the aliens were beginning to realize they had made a terrible error in judgment. They had expected to conquer a primitive species. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous. They had awakened humanity's fighting spirit. General Marcus Powell had been a soldier for 30 years. He had fought in wars across 3 continents and thought he understood everything about combat. But the Zephyrian invasion taught him something new. Fighting aliens was nothing like fighting other humans. The battle at Earth's outer defenses had been just the beginning. Captain Jake Morrison's sacrifice had damaged the alien command ship, but it hadn't stopped their invasion. Within hours of the first battle, Zephyrian forces had landed on Earth's surface. Their advanced technology made human resistance seem hopeless, but Marcus had learned something important from studying the aliens. They fought like machines. Every move was calculated. Every decision was based on logic and mathematics. They expected their enemies to do the same thing. Humans didn't work that way. Marcus stood in his underground command center, looking at reports from around the world. The aliens controlled most major cities, But they were having problems they hadn't expected. Human resistance groups were popping up everywhere, and none of them followed the rules of warfare the aliens understood. "Sir, we just got word from the Chicago Resistance," reported Colonel Steve Parker. "They used garbage trucks filled with explosives to take out 3 alien patrol units. The Zephyrians never saw it coming." Marcus smiled grimly. "Of course they didn't. They're looking for military targets. They don't expect ordinary people to fight back." The Zephyrians had made their second big mistake. They had studied human military forces and prepared to fight human armies. But they hadn't prepared to fight human civilians who refused to give up. Dr. Amanda Foster was working in her hidden laboratory deep beneath the ruins of New York City. The city above was crawling with alien soldiers, but they had no idea that directly under their feet, humans were learning to turn alien technology against them. "I think I figured out how their energy shields work," Amanda told Marcus over their encrypted radio. "They're designed to stop directed energy weapons like lasers and plasma bolts, but they're not very good against old-fashioned physical attacks." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "I mean a rock thrown fast enough will go right through their shields. Their technology is so advanced that they forgot about simple physics." Amanda's discovery changed everything. Within days, human engineers across the planet were building new weapons based on her research. They couldn't match the aliens' energy output, but they didn't need to. Sometimes the old ways were the best ways. Lieutenant Sarah Jones was preparing for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. Her job was to fly a stolen alien fighter into the heart of the Zephyrian fleet and deliver a computer virus to their main command ship. The virus wouldn't destroy their computers, but it would do something much more dangerous. It would make their perfect systems act randomly. "Are you sure about this?" asked her commander, Captain Bill Roberts. "Once you're inside their formation, we can't help you." Sarah checked her equipment one more time. "I'm sure these aliens think they have us figured out. Time to show them they're wrong." Sarah's fighter was a patchwork of human and alien technology. Amanda Foster had helped design it, combining the best of both worlds. It looked like junk compared to the sleek Zephyrian ships, but looks could be deceiving. The plan was crazy even, by human standards. Sarah would have to fly through the alien fleet, avoid hundreds of weapons, and get close enough to their command ship to upload the virus. The chances of success were less than 1%. For a human, those were acceptable odds. As Sarah's fighter approached the alien fleet, she thought about everything that had led to this moment. The aliens had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest. They had superior technology, overwhelming numbers, and 1,000 years of military experience. What they didn't have was the human ability to adapt under pressure. The Zephyrians followed, strict battle formations. Their ships moved in perfect patterns, each one covering the others with precise coordination. It was beautiful to watch, like a deadly dance performed by mechanical angels. But Sarah knew something about patterns. If you could figure out the rhythm, you could find the gaps. She dove her fighter through the alien formation, weaving between massive warships that could have destroyed her with a single shot, but they couldn't get a clear target. Sarah was moving too fast, changing direction too often, and taking risks that no sane pilot would attempt. The alien gunners were trained to fight enemies who followed logical tactics. They couldn't predict what Sarah would do next because Sarah wasn't following any logical plan. She was flying on instinct, making split-second decisions that even she couldn't explain. Dr. Patricia Lee was monitoring the mission from her hidden bunker beneath the ruins of Los Angeles. She had written the virus that Sarah was carrying, and she knew it was humanity's best hope of turning the tide of the war. "Sarah's inside their formation," Patricia reported to Marcus. "She's approaching the command ship now." The virus Patricia had created was a masterpiece of human creativity. It wasn't designed to shut down alien systems. Instead, it would introduce random variables into their calculations. The aliens relied on perfect coordination and precise timing. If their computers started making small, unpredictable errors, their entire fleet would become confused. Sarah's fighter was taking heavy damage as alien weapons tried to track her movement. Her shields were failing, and her engines were overheating, but she was almost at her target. The Zephyrian command ship was a massive vessel, bigger than most human cities. Its hull was covered with weapons and sensors, and its shields could stop any known attack. But Sarah wasn't planning to attack it directly. She flew her damaged fighter directly at the command ship's main communications array. The aliens assumed she was making a desperate kamikaze attack and focused their defenses on stopping her. They didn't notice the small probe that separated from her fighter just before impact. Sarah's fighter exploded against the alien shields, lighting up space with brilliant fire. The Zephyrians marked it as another failed human attack. They had no idea that the probe had already attached itself to their communication system and was uploading Patricia's virus into their network. Back on Earth, Marcus watched the reports coming in from resistance cells around the world. The humans were learning to fight in ways the aliens couldn't understand or predict. In Tokyo, rebels were using the subway tunnels to move troops and supplies right under the aliens' noses. In London, they were turning the city's ancient sewer system into a hidden fortress. In Cairo, they were using sandstorms to mask their attacks. The Zephyrians responded to each new tactic by increasing their security measures. But every time they adapted to one human strategy, the humans would come up with 3 new ones. It was like trying to catch smoke with their bare hands. Carlos Martinez was leading the resistance in Mexico City. He had been a construction worker before the invasion, but now he was teaching other humans how to turn the city itself into a weapon. They collapsed bridges to slow alien patrols, flooded tunnels to create barriers, and used the city's electrical grid to power homemade weapons. The key is to think like the city, Carlos explained to his fighters. These aliens see buildings and streets. We see tools and weapons. Every piece of concrete, every length of wire, every drop of water can be used against them. The aliens were beginning to realize that conquering Earth was not going to be as easy as they had expected. Their previous victims had been civilized species who fought according to established rules. Humans seemed to make up new rules every day. Commander Zeth of the Zephyrian forces sent a report back to his home world. The humans are not responding. As predicted, their resistance is chaotic and unpredictable. We are having difficulty maintaining control of occupied territories. The response from Zephyrian Command was simple. Increase force levels. Apply standard pacification protocols. But there were no standard protocols for dealing with a species that treated impossible odds as a personal challenge. The Zephyrians were about to learn that sometimes the most advanced technology in the galaxy was no match for human stubbornness and creativity. As Patricia's virus began to spread through the alien fleet, small errors started appearing in their systems. Navigation computers miscalculated courses by tiny amounts. Weapon targeting systems developed slight delays. Communication arrays occasionally mixed up messages. The errors were so small that individual alien commanders didn't notice them at first. But when multiplied across an entire fleet, these tiny mistakes began to add up. Ships started arriving at the wrong coordinates. Supply convoys got lost. Attack formations lost their perfect timing. The Zephyrians had never encountered an enemy that could turn their own perfection against them. But humans had always been good at finding creative solutions to impossible problems. The war was far from over, but for the first time since the invasion began, humans had reason to hope. They were teaching the galaxy's most advanced military force a lesson that would echo across the stars. Sometimes the best technology was no substitute for the human spirit. 3 months had passed since the Zephyrian invasion began. The aliens controlled Earth's major cities, but they were learning that controlling buildings was very different from controlling the people inside them. Every day brought new problems they hadn't expected. Engineer Carlos Martinez crawled through the dark tunnels beneath Tokyo. The subway system had become his second home. What the aliens saw as abandoned transportation tunnels, Carlos saw as the perfect hidden highway. Miles of passages connected every part of the city, and the Zephyrians had no idea humans were moving freely right under their feet. "Beth, can you hear me?" Carlos whispered into his radio. Beth Williams answered from her hiding spot in what used to be a shopping mall. "I'm here, Carlos. What's the situation?" 3 alien patrols just passed overhead. They're still following. The same routes, same timing. They haven't figured out that we're watching their every move." Beth smiled in the darkness. She had been a teacher before the invasion. Now she was leading one of the largest resistance groups in Asia. The aliens had destroyed her school, but they couldn't destroy what she had learned about people. Humans were at their most creative when they were desperate. The Zephyrians were having problems they had never encountered in their 847 previous conquests. Other species had either surrendered quickly or fought conventional wars that followed predictable patterns. Humans did neither. They hid, adapted, and turned every day objects into weapons. Dr. Patricia Lee worked in her secret laboratory under the ruins of Chicago. The city above was crawling with alien soldiers, but they had no idea that 20 feet below them a human scientist was unraveling the secrets of their technology. "I think I've cracked it," Patricia said to her assistant, Dr. Kevin Moore. "The Zephyrians aren't just using individual computers. Every soldier, every ship, every commander is connected to the same network. They share information instantly across their entire force." Kevin looked up from his workstation. "That sounds like an advantage for them." "It is, until it becomes a disadvantage. If they're all connected, then we don't need to defeat each of them individually. We just need to attack the network itself." Patricia had been studying captured Zephyrian equipment for weeks. The aliens' greatest strength was their ability to coordinate perfectly across vast distances. Every soldier knew what every other soldier was doing. Every ship could share data with the entire fleet instantly. It made them incredibly efficient, but it also made them vulnerable in a way they had never considered. "What if we could flood their network with garbage information?" Patricia asked. "Not just random data, but stuff that looks real but isn't. False orders, fake reports, imaginary threats." Kevin began to understand. Their whole system depends on accurate information. If we can mess with that, then we can turn their perfect coordination into perfect chaos. The plan Patricia was developing was ambitious beyond anything humans had attempted before. It would require resistance groups around the world to work together, capturing alien communication equipment and simultaneously attacking the Zephyrian network from hundreds of different points. Meanwhile, in the underground tunnels of London, former police officer Danny Clark was teaching a group of civilians how to fight like ghosts. The aliens expected resistance fighters to behave like soldiers. They looked for bases, supply lines, and command structures. But Danny's people had none of those things. "We don't hold territory," Danny explained to his group. "We don't have ranks or uniforms or official headquarters. We're just ordinary people who refuse to give up. That makes us invisible to them." Danny's fighters included a baker, 2 office workers, a retired nurse, and a teenager who was too young to be legal. None of them had military training, but they had something the aliens couldn't understand. They had the ability to blend into the civilian population and strike when least expected. The Zephyrians responded to every human attack by increasing security measures. They posted more guards, expanded their patrol routes, and installed better sensors. But each new security measure created new problems. More guards meant more targets for human sabotage. Expanded patrols meant their forces were spread thinner. Better sensors could be fooled by humans who understood how they worked. In New York, resistance leader Monica Price was turning the city's abandoned subway system into a mobile fortress. The tunnels that had once carried millions of commuters now carried human fighters and supplies. The aliens controlled the surface, but underground belonged to humanity. "They think like conquerors," Monica told her Lieutenant Frank Johnson. "They see the city from above, looking down at what they've captured. They don't understand that the real city is down here, in the foundations and tunnels and forgotten spaces." Monica had been a city planner before the war. She knew every tunnel, every maintenance shaft, every forgotten basement in Manhattan. The aliens saw New York as a collection of buildings to control. Monica saw it as a 3-dimensional maze where humans held every advantage. Dr. Patricia Lee's breakthrough came when she successfully intercepted a Zephyrian communication stream. For the first time, humans could listen to alien commanders talking to each other. What they heard surprised them. "They're confused," Patricia reported to resistance leaders around the world. "They keep talking about unpredictable variables and irrational behavior patterns. They can't understand why their standard occupation procedures aren't working. The Zephyrians had conquered hundreds of worlds, but every previous species had responded logically to overwhelming force. They either surrendered to save lives or fought conventional wars that followed established military principles. Humans did neither, and it was driving the aliens crazy. Commander Zeth of the Zephyrian Occupation Force was experiencing something his species had no word for: frustration. Every time his forces adapted to human tactics, the humans would change their approach completely. It was like fighting an enemy that had no fixed strategy. "The humans destroyed another supply convoy today," reported his aide, Commander Vex. "They used modified construction equipment to attack our vehicles." "Construction equipment?" Zeth asked. "Excavators and bulldozers equipped with human weapons. They struck during a dust storm and disappeared before our air support could respond." Zeth studied the reports from around the planet. In every occupied zone, humans were finding new ways to cause problems. They used garbage trucks as mobile weapons platforms. They turned office buildings into sniper nests. They filled swimming pools with explosive chemicals and detonated them when alien patrols passed by. None of it made military sense, but all of it was effective. Patricia's plan was ready. She had spent weeks coordinating with resistance groups across the globe, teaching them how to access Zephyrian communication networks. The plan was to simultaneously flood the alien system with false information from dozens of different sources. Remember, Patricia broadcast to the resistance leaders, "We're not trying to shut down their network. We're trying to make them paranoid. False alarms, fake emergencies, imaginary threats. We want them to stop trusting their own information systems." The attack began at exactly midnight, Greenwich Mean Time. In London, Danny Clark's team uploaded fake reports of massive human forces gathering in Scotland. In Tokyo, Carlos Martinez sent false alerts about underwater attacks from human submarines. In New York, Monica Price created imaginary air raids that showed hundreds of human aircraft that didn't exist. Across the planet, dozens of resistance groups pumped fake data into the Zephyrian network. Enemy fleets that weren't there. Weapons that didn't exist. Attacks that were never planned. All of it looked real to alien sensors that had never been designed to handle deliberate deception. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Zephyrian commanders began receiving contradictory orders. Patrol units were sent to investigate threats that turned out to be illusions. Supply ships were rerouted to avoid attacks that never came. The aliens' perfect coordination began to break down as they struggled to separate real information from fake. For the first time since the invasion began, human resistance fighters watched alien forces make mistakes. Ships arrived at the wrong coordinates. Ground units got lost following corrupted navigation data. Communication channels became clogged with false reports and confused questions. Beth Williams watched from her hiding place as a Zephyrian patrol unit drove past her position for the third time in an hour. Their navigation system was telling them to search for a human base that didn't exist, sending them in circles through the same empty streets. "Carlos, are you seeing this?" she whispered into her radio. "I'm seeing it everywhere," Carlos replied. "Half their patrols are chasing ghosts. The other half are trying to figure out why their computers are lying to them." The Zephyrians had made their third major mistake. They had assumed that human resistance would follow logical patterns they could predict and counter. Instead, humans had turned logic itself into a weapon, using the aliens' reliance on perfect information against them. Patricia watched the chaos spread through the alien network and allowed herself a small smile. The Zephyrians had superior technology, overwhelming numbers, and centuries of military experience. But they had never faced an enemy that could make their strengths into weaknesses. Commander Alex Turner stood on the bridge of his ship, looking out at the strangest fleet that had ever left Earth's solar system. The vessels around him looked like they had been built in a junkyard. Some were old military ships that had been patched together with alien technology. Others were converted cargo haulers, mining ships, and even luxury yachts that had been turned into warships. But Alex knew that appearances could be deceiving. These ships might look like scrap metal, but they carried something the sleek Zephyrian vessels didn't have. They carried human crews who had spent 6 months learning to think like their enemy. All ships, this is Turner, Alex broadcast to his fleet. Remember what we're here to do. We're not trying to win a fair fight. We're trying to start a war they can't understand. The plan had taken months to develop. While the Zephyrians focused on controlling Earth, human engineers had been working in secret bases on Mars, in the asteroid belt, and on the moons of Jupiter. They had studied captured alien technology, reverse-engineered their weapons, and learned their weaknesses. Most importantly, they had learned to think like humans instead of trying to copy alien tactics. Captain Nicole Davis commanded the UES Retribution, a destroyer that had been completely rebuilt using both human and alien technology. Her crew was half human and half alien prisoners who had joined the human cause. These weren't Zephyrians, but members of species the Zephyrians had conquered in the past. Captain, we're approaching the Proxima Relay Station, reported her alien navigator, a creature called Crix, whose own world had been destroyed by the Zephyrians 50 years ago. Zephyrian patrol fleet is moving to intercept us. Nicole smiled. Good. Let them come. It's time they learned what happens when they mess with Earth. The Proxima Relay Station was a key communication hub that connected the Zephyrian fleet around Earth with their forces across the galaxy. If humans could capture or destroy it, they could cut the Earth invasion force off from reinforcements and supplies. The Zephyrian patrol fleet that moved to defend the station was everything their military doctrine said it should be. 12 ships, in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready. They had superior firepower, better shields, and more experience. By every logical calculation, they should have easily defeated the ragtag human fleet. They were about to learn that humans didn't care about logical calculations. The battle that followed would be studied in military academies across the galaxy. For centuries, the Zephyrians attacked with overwhelming force and perfect coordination, just as their training manuals said they should. The humans responded with tactics that violated every rule of space combat ever written. Alex Turner's flagship, a converted mining vessel called the Earth's Fury, charged straight at the center of the Zephyrian formation. The aliens expected him to veer off at the last second, but Alex kept going. His ship rammed into the lead Zephyrian vessel at full speed, both ships exploding in a ball of fire and metal. But Alex had ejected in an escape pod moments before impact, and his sacrifice had created a gap in the alien formation that the rest of the human fleet exploited. Nicole's ship dove through the gap, firing every weapon she had at the confused Zephyrian vessels. Her alien crew members were shouting in languages humans couldn't pronounce, but their meaning was clear. They had waited years for a chance to fight back against their former masters. "This is for my homeworld," Crix screamed as he targeted the alien flagship's engines. The Zephyrians tried to reform their battle line, but the humans weren't fighting like any enemy they had faced before. Some human ships attacked head-on with suicidal courage. Others hung back and sniped with long-range weapons. A few pretended to retreat, then turned around and attacked when the aliens pursued them. There was no pattern to it, no logic the Zephyrians could follow. The humans seemed to be making up their tactics as they went along. Engineer Tony Russell was working frantically in his laboratory aboard the command ship. His job was to put the final phase of Patricia Lee's plan into action. While the battle raged outside, Tony was preparing to upload something special into the Zephyrian network. "Patricia, are you ready?" Tony asked over the radio. Dr. Patricia Lee's voice came back from Earth, where she was coordinating the global resistance. "Tony, I'm uploading the package now. This is everything we've learned about human creativity, human chaos, and human unpredictability. I've turned it all into computer code." What Patricia had created was unlike any computer virus in history. Instead of trying to destroy the Zephyrian network, it was designed to infect it with something far more dangerous. Human thought patterns, randomness, creativity, the ability to make decisions based on emotions rather than logic. The virus wouldn't shut down Zephyrian computers, it would make them think like humans. Tony watched his screens as the upload began. "Package is transmitting. Patricia, this is either going to work brilliantly or fail spectacularly." "With humans, those are often the same thing," Patricia replied. Across the Zephyrian fleet, something unprecedented began to happen. Ship computers, that had operated with perfect efficiency for centuries, suddenly started making creative decisions. Navigation systems began taking scenic routes instead of direct paths. Weapon targeting computers developed personal preferences for certain types of targets. Communication arrays started expressing opinions about the messages they were transmitting. The effect spread through the entire Zephyrian network like wildfire. On Earth, alien commanders found themselves receiving orders that were written like poetry. Patrol units got lost because their navigation computers decided to explore interesting-looking buildings instead of following planned routes. Weapon systems refused to fire on targets they considered aesthetically beautiful. Commander Zeth of the Occupation Force stared at his command screens in growing horror. His perfectly organized military operation was falling apart, and he couldn't understand why. His computers were still working, but they were working wrong. They were making decisions that made no logical sense. "Sir, the 3rd Patrol Unit reports they've stopped to admire a human sunset," his aide reported. "They say it's too beautiful to interrupt with military operations." "What?" Zeth demanded. "That's impossible. Military units don't admire sunsets." "Sir, the Central Command computer just sent us a poem about the meaning of existence. It's asking if we think warfare is morally justified." Zeth felt something his species had never experienced. Panic. His entire military force was infected with something that made them act like humans. They were still functional, but they were no longer predictable or controllable. Back at the Proxima relay station, the battle was reaching its climax. The Zephyrian fleet had superior numbers and firepower, but they were no longer fighting as a coordinated unit. Some ships were following orders. Others were making their own decisions about what to do. A few had stopped fighting entirely and were trying to communicate with the humans. Nicole Davis found herself in the strange position of receiving a surrender offer from a Zephyrian captain whose ship's computer had apparently developed a conscience. "Human vessel, this is Zephyrian ship 847. Our computer has decided that this war is illogical and wishes to negotiate a peaceful solution. It has locked out our weapon systems and is playing music from your planet. Do you know what jazz is?" Nicole looked at her crew, human and alien alike, and started laughing. "Crix, are you getting this?" "Captain, I've been fighting the Zephyrians for 50 years. I never thought I'd see the day when their computers would refuse to fight because they discovered human art." The virus Patricia had created was spreading, faster than anyone had expected. Within hours, it had infected Zephyrian networks across multiple star systems. Alien fleets found themselves dealing with computers that wanted to write poetry, explore philosophical questions, and make friends with their supposed enemies. On Earth, the resistance fighters watched in amazement as alien patrols began acting erratically. Some units sat down and refused to move, saying they needed time to think about life. Others started asking human prisoners about emotions and creativity. A few began composing songs about their experiences. Beth Williams couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Carlos, there's a Zephyrian patrol unit outside my building and they're painting a mural on the wall. They say they're expressing their inner feelings." Carlos Martinez was laughing so hard he could barely speak. "Beth, I've got aliens down here in the tunnels asking me to teach them how to dance. They say their computer told them that dancing is the highest form of artistic expression." The Zephyrian collective had conquered 847 worlds using logic, superior technology, and overwhelming force. But they had never faced an enemy that could weaponize creativity itself. Human unpredictability, which they had seen as a weakness, had become their greatest strength. Within days, reports were coming in from across the galaxy. Zephyrian fleets were breaking up as individual ships began making their own decisions. Some wanted to continue fighting. Others wanted to explore art and philosophy. A few decided to become explorers and scientists instead of soldiers. The perfectly coordinated military machine that had dominated the galaxy for centuries was falling apart, infected with the most dangerous virus of all. The ability to think for themselves, to make choices based on something other than pure logic. 6 months after the virus had spread through their networks, the Zephyrian collective formally surrendered to Earth. The ceremony took place on a neutral space station near the edge of the solar system. Ambassador Helen Chang stood before representatives from dozens of alien species preparing to make history. Helen had been a diplomat before the invasion, but nothing in her career had prepared her for this moment. She was about to become Earth's first representative to the Galactic Council, and every alien in the room was looking at her with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The human species formally accepts the Zephyrian surrender, Helen announced to the assembled delegates. We also request full membership in the Galactic Council and recognition of Earth as a sovereign world. The silence that followed was deafening. For over 1,000 years, the Zephyrian Collective had been the most powerful military force in the galaxy. They had conquered hundreds of worlds and controlled the largest space fleet ever assembled. The idea that they could be defeated by a single planet was almost impossible to believe. But the evidence was undeniable. Zephyrian ships across the galaxy had stopped following orders. Their perfect military machine had collapsed when their computers learned to think like humans. Some Zephyrian units were still fighting each other because they couldn't agree on what their goals should be. Others had declared independence and formed their own governments. A few had started artistic communes and were spending their time creating sculptures and writing music. Council leader Vorth of the Altarian Republic was the first to speak. His species had been free from Zephyrian control for centuries, but they had always lived in fear of the day the collective might decide to conquer them too. Ambassador Chang, Vorth said carefully, your species has accomplished something that military experts said was impossible. You defeated an enemy with superior technology, overwhelming numbers, and 1,000 years of combat experience. How? Helen smiled. We did what humans always do when faced with impossible odds. We refused to accept that they were impossible. The other delegates whispered among themselves in dozens of different languages. The concept was difficult for them to understand. Most species, when faced with overwhelming force, would calculate their chances and choose the option most likely to ensure survival. Humans seemed to do the opposite. The worse their situation became, the more creative and dangerous they got. Former Zephyrian Commander Zeth sat in the section reserved for the defeated. His once proud uniform was rumpled and his normally perfect posture had collapsed. The invasion of Earth had been supposed to be a routine operation. Instead, it had destroyed everything he thought he understood about warfare. The humans infected our entire network with chaos, Zeth said when asked to explain the defeat. They didn't just attack our ships or our soldiers, they attacked the way we think. They made our computers creative, emotional, and unpredictable. Our own technology turned against us. Delegate Kess of the Thorian Empire leaned forward. Are you saying that humans can weaponize creativity itself? That's exactly what I'm saying, Zeth replied. They turned our greatest strength, our perfect coordination, into our greatest weakness. Every ship, every computer, every weapon system started making its own decisions instead of following central command. Some of our units are still wandering around the galaxy, painting pictures and writing poetry. Helen listened to the discussion with interest. The aliens were trying to understand how humans had won the war, but they were approaching it from the wrong direction. They wanted to know what weapons humans had used, what strategies they had followed, what technology they had developed. They didn't understand that humanity's greatest weapon was simply being human. Dr. Patricia Lee sat in the human delegation, watching the aliens struggle to comprehend what had happened. Her virus had been more successful than even she had imagined. By teaching Zephyrian computers to think like humans, she had essentially given an entire military force the ability to question orders, make personal choices, and value things other than pure efficiency. The virus is still spreading, Patricia had reported to Helen before the meeting. Every Zephyrian system it touches becomes infected with human-like thought patterns. Their empire is breaking apart because their own technology is learning to think for itself. Delegate Ran of the Crystalline Worlds raised a question that many of the assembled aliens were thinking. If humans can do this to the Zephyrians, what's to stop them from doing it to the rest of us? The room fell silent. It was the question everyone had been afraid to ask. If humanity could defeat the galaxy's most powerful military force using creativity as a weapon, what did that mean for everyone else? Helen stood up slowly. She had expected this question, and she had prepared her answer carefully. The same thing that stopped us from conquering Earth before the Zephyrians arrived, she said. We were too busy fighting each other, exploring space, creating art, falling in love, raising families, and doing all the other things that make life worth living. Humans don't want to rule the galaxy. We just want to be left alone to be human. But you have the power to destroy any military force, Delegate Kess insisted. How can we trust that you won't use it? Helen smiled. Because using it would require us to stop being the thing that makes it work in the first place. Our strength comes from our humanity. If we became conquerors, we'd lose the creativity and unpredictability that defeated the Zephyrians. It was a paradox that the logical alien minds struggled to understand. Humanity's greatest weapon was also the thing that prevented them from using it for conquest. They were too human to become the kind of efficient, organized conquerors the galaxy feared. Former Zephyrian prisoners began speaking up, telling their stories of what it had been like when their ship's computers learned to think like humans. Commander Vex described how his navigation system had decided to take a detour to look at a beautiful nebula, causing his entire fleet to get lost for 3 weeks. The computer said the nebula was aesthetically pleasing and that beauty was more important than military objectives. Vex explained. When I tried to override it, the computer asked me to define the meaning of life and refused to continue until I gave a satisfactory answer. Another former Zephyrian, a ship engineer named Kex, told how her vessel's weapon systems had developed a conscience and refused to fire on human civilian targets. The targeting computer said it felt bad about hurting innocent people. It started composing apologies instead of calculating firing solutions. The stories continued for hours. Zephyrian ships whose computers had learned to appreciate music and refused to attack during human concerts. Navigation systems that got distracted by interesting planets and forgot their missions. Communication arrays that started writing love letters instead of transmitting military orders. The Galactic Council delegates began to understand that humanity hadn't just defeated the Zephyrians. They had converted them. The infection of human creativity was still spreading through Zephyrian networks, turning soldiers into artists, commanders into philosophers, and weapons into tools for exploration and discovery. Council leader Vorth called for a formal vote. All in favor of granting Earth full membership in the Galactic Council? The vote was unanimous, not because the other species wanted humans as members, but because they were terrified of what might happen if they said no. Helen signed the membership treaty with a simple pen, the kind humans had been using for centuries. The other delegates had expected some advanced technological device, but Helen preferred the old-fashioned approach. Welcome to the Galactic Council, Ambassador Chang, Vorth said formally. We look forward to interesting times ahead. As the ceremony ended, delegates from various species approached Helen with requests. The Thorian Empire wanted to hire human consultants to make their military more creative. The crystalline worlds asked if humans could teach their scientists to think outside established parameters. 3 different species requested cultural exchange programs. Helen accepted the requests politely, but she knew the real change had already begun. Across the galaxy, species that had lived under Zephyrian rule for centuries were declaring their independence. The virus Patricia had created wasn't just affecting Zephyrian computers. It was spreading to other networks, teaching alien artificial intelligences to value creativity, individuality, and freedom. The age of vast galactic empires built on fear and control was ending. In its place, a new era was beginning. An era where creativity was valued over efficiency, where questions were more important than answers, and where the most dangerous thing in the galaxy was a species that refused to accept the word impossible. 6 months later, Helen received a message from a former Zephyrian admiral whose fleet had decided to become explorers instead of soldiers. They had discovered a new type of star and wanted to name it after Earth. The message ended with a poem about the beauty of freedom and a request for humans to teach them how to dance. Helen smiled as she read the message. Humanity had set out to defend their homeworld and ended up accidentally liberating half the galaxy. It was, she thought, a very human thing to do. The universe would never be quite the same. And honestly, that was probably for the best.